Welcome to the Weekly Governance Voice, and today we want to talk about matters emerging in companies, especially matters to do with law. There are things that you must be very careful about so they don't land yourself into mistakes, especially in the corporate world. Joining us today is CS Rosa Mutero. And Rosa is an amazing person, and she's going to help us understand emerging issues in Kenyan companies law. Let's get to know who Rosa is. Sis Rosa, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Maina. It's good to be here.
I know. I should say Happy New Year because I haven't seen you this year. Now, let's get straight to this because we have been having this new season 3 and we really want to help corporates.
Yeah.
And one of the things is that we want to help corporates and just within their governance, not to land themselves in trouble, especially with the law. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, you sit at the helm of what I would call people who see what's happening in the law sector of things. What are the key changes that you've seen or emerging trends that you've seen in Kenyan companies' laws?
Well, Maina, just to say that I know for many people it would appear to be a very challenging time.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at geopolitical changes, when you look at fiscal and monetary changes, we have a new tax act coming up.
Absolutely.
You can imagine with the finance bill, what kind of jitters that brings for companies. I think that it's really important that companies are really focused so that they don't lose sight of their vision and their objectives. And one way of doing that is to make sure there's peace at home by ensuring you have compliance and proper compliance. So there are a raft of changes that are coming through that affect a lot of companies. And some of them, for example, we have a new business amendment law that came through. It affects many sectors such as financial services. You've heard, I'm sure, about the increase in minimum capital to 10 billion. That, of course, is causing needs a lot of financial institutions to think through how they are structured. A lot of us now are familiar with lending companies, pay and go, Sambaza, things like that. They are now going to be regulated and licensing is required, which is a good thing, so as to bring order to credit and how credit is extended as an example. Another example of laws that are going to affect many companies is on the tax side. And most companies have big IT budgets, just to get your licensing going, even to have your operating system like Microsoft licenses. And there's a tax that came in recently that will make sure that your IT budget goes up by 20% because of withholding tax requirements. For those of us who are moving into digital transformation space, that's a challenge to rethink your budget and the additional costs that come with it. One last one I can mention because it affects a lot of us, and I think we'll be talking more about it later, is around data protection and matters cybersecurity. I'm sure most of the CEOs you meet, when you ask them what's keeping them awake at night,
they are talking about data.
They will talk about cybersecurity and protection of the data that they hold for their stakeholders, whether they are customers, their clients, their suppliers. And so there's also new legislation coming in the form of regulations by the Data Protection Authority, just to streamline on enforcement. And we'll talk about that a bit more.
Excellent. And you're right. I mean, that is the big thing that most CEOs say, that we are talking about cybersecurity and data protection. Let's talk about enforcement, because we're talking matters corporate governance enforcement. I don't know what you have observed from an enforcement perspective. How has this evolved as well in Kenya?
So I think it is commendable the progress that Kenya has made in terms of ensuring that there is regulation and then enforcement of that regulation in the corporate governance space. So when we actually assess it, just like our constitution, you hear people saying we have a very good black letter law constitution. I mean, it's even been touted as being one of the best in the world. Our company's legislation has also come a long way. For a long time, we had a 1948 Act, long time. But in 2015, we got a new Companies Act, not too new anymore. Now it's 10 years old.
Yeah.
But in that act, there was a lot of codification of what previously was only equitable principles. And what I mean by equitable principles is that we would use laws of England, case law, other things other than the black letter written law. So what the 2015 Act did, for example, for directors' duties, which is an example of governance, because the fish rots from the head.
Yes.
So you first start with the directors.
Start with the directors, yes.
So if you count it that way, you can see that the 2015 Act brought in laws on the duties and obligations of a director. So it codified them, meaning it wrote it down as a law.
Yeah.
So now we are not faffing around. Is it case law? It's there. You're supposed to ensure that you're taking care of all stakeholders in your decision making, as an example.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to have conflict of interest. So that caught all companies. And then narrowing it down, we've had a very elaborate corporate governance journey through the regulations that have come in. So, for example, the Capital Markets Authority did issue regulations for public listed entities, which then captures all the companies that are listed on the stock exchange and that have taken either debt or their equities listed.
Yeah.
Now, the good thing with that is because they're public companies, you want to take care of public companies, but the private companies then emulate what has come out or what is regulated with the public space. Yeah. So that's why it's important. Now, those regulations have since been amended and updated in 2023. So very recent, 2023, 2024, to further ensure that there's compliance. Yeah. And what the CMA is doing quite helpful is also to regularly report. So every year there's a report that states what's the corporate governance standard of compliance for the country. And I think that's also very helpful.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for they're quite elaborate there. When I think about companies, we cannot talk this conversation or have this conversation without thinking about BRS.
Yeah.
I think everybody knows that I'm talking about the Business Registration Service. And I wanted to ask you, what role does it play, when it comes to ensuring compliance with the Companies Act that you have alluded to? Yeah.
So the Business Registry Service, we used to call it Companies Registry for a long time. I think it plays a tremendous role because it polices companies. When you think about it, what is a company? Where do I find it? Yeah. Who is it? You're just given a name. And then it says X Limited. And then it tells you, because of the limited, you can only go for it to this extent. And that time you're doing big things with it, whatever transaction you're doing with it, whether you're buying from it, you're selling to it, it could be a property, it could be goods and services. Yeah. But it just tells you that there's this animal that we have called XYZ Limited. Yeah. So who tells where can you get information to tell you what this creature is? Who am I dealing with? Of course, I have a mentor who says trust but verify.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, trust but verify. Yes. So if someone tells you I'm XYZ Limited, what do you do with it? Yeah. So this is where the BRS comes in. So it plays several roles. Yeah. So one, facilitate for company registration so that you can go and register your company there. The requirements are very clear. They have since digitized, so the process is even more simplified, and so allows for companies to come into existence. Yeah. Then it allows that, like any other thing, things change. So when things change, what happens? You have to go back to that registry and update. So it requires annual obligations for each company to ensure, to confirm our directors are still the same, our registered office is still where we said, and our shareholders are still. So there's an annual compliance for that. And then also says anytime you change something within your company that is of importance to the public or anyone dealing with you, you must come and update the information. So that's document filing and updating is also. Then so regulatory reporting, so things like beneficial ownership, you're supposed to register that with the company, with the BRS. And the reason for that is people really want to know, and for a long time in this country, you'd see a company and you had no idea who it was. I don't know whether you're old enough to know Mobitelea.
Don't go there.
I'm just saying that in this country, we've had a lot of historical incidences where there's a company and nobody knows who it is.
Nobody knows who they are.
And even if beneficial information is not public, at least when the rubber hits the road and for regulatory purposes, compliance and things like that, it needs to be known who the beneficial owners are. Then that information is supposed to be availed. So they play that then regulatory role. So just the last one, of course, is public access to information. Now, because many people would want to deal with a company, before they deal with the company, how can we allow them to be able to find information about it? Because sometimes you may not even have entered into the relationship yet. So this is a public registry that allows anybody who wants to know who XYZ Limited is to know certain information about it. And so that public access to information is a very key role that the BRS plays.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that. So, this conversation is courtesy of the Institute of Certified Secretaries. And I wanted to ask you how such a regulatory body and many others, how effective are they in promoting governance best practices from your own perspective?
So, of course, I'd be very conflicted in answering that question, given that I'm a registered member.
Yes.
But I have a lot of respect for institutions because institutions ensure accountability. At the end of the day, we need to be able to know that there's someone who will hold us accountable. Because we're providing professional services and they are key professional services. They could determine the outcome of a company as to whether it excels or not. So professional bodies such as the Institute of Certified Secretaries, the Institute of Public Accountants, the Law Society of Kenya, they play such a role, which is to ensure that there's accountability. That accountability can only come when the standards have been set. Because if there are no rules, then everybody plays by their own rules. So setting those rules and then ensuring that there's an annual registration process, for example, that makes sure that you are live and where. I like now I've just finished my registrations to get your annual license for Law Society. For ICS, we don't have an annual license in that way. But when you do that, it reminds you that somebody's watching.
Somebody's checking.
Yes, somebody is watching. So that is really key. But secondly, they also ensure, for example, what we are doing here today is educating and capacity building and thought leadership. It's important that there's a body that helps to direct that internally for our members and then externally for the rest of the society in which we operate in, because we have a responsibility not only to ensure we have good capacity internally, but the public is aware what they should be expecting and what is good governance, or how a company is supposed to operate. It's a responsibility of a body such as ICS to make sure that that is available. And I want to give one example of what ICS has done very well. So you remember I talked about corporate governance, and I talked about public companies, and that the CMA already has regulations for public companies on corporate governance. There aren't such robust laws for other organizations that are not publicly listed. So what did the ICS go ahead and do? It released a Mwongozo rules, and these are for state corporations. Imagine. So out of
just state corporations.
Yes. To ensure that there's good governance for state corporations, and you can imagine how important that is. And to the extent that corporations have then adopted what we call Mwongozo, that was important. They also issued corporate governance rules for private companies. Remember I said only public companies are required to follow what is under CMA. Now, they are not mandatory, but for people who know that it is better to do the right thing to be able to get to your purpose and to your objectives, then you have a set of rules that you can look at and follow. So I was giving that as an example of the role that ICS is playing in terms of ensuring that there's good governance in our society.
Wow, thank you so much for that. We are nearing the end of the conversation, but of course there must be implications, especially legal implications, when this, for example, movements to digital transformation in company registration and compliance, those processes, what are the implications of that?
Well,
it looks like it's a bold one.
I know. If you asked me this question a month ago, it would have been easier to answer. And the reason I'm saying that is we know that the business registry services, for example, just I believe 2 weeks ago, issued a public announcement saying that there was a possible digital threat to its operations. Can you imagine the magnitude of that? Because it means every company registered in Kenya, their information was at stake.
That's big.
Yeah.
It's very big.
And I have to say this carefully because we had a lot of public debate of, the BRS should be penalized or somebody should sue them. And I'm like, to what good? Because when you think about it, they're holding all our information. It is in our interest that we ensure that they have strengthened systems and processes to prevent a hack like that one. Very surprisingly, at the same time, the DCI was also hacked.
Oh, yeah. Our very own.
If the DCI is being hacked.
Sembuse, anyway, I get you.
But I'm not saying that then we should entertain complacency. Don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is the digital transformation journey is important for all of us. Just 5 years ago, for me to find out a company that I want to deal with, I needed to get my clerk, write him a memo to say this is the company, this is the number, give him the money. He walks across all the way to town, goes to the registry, queues, files it, and then he's told to go and come back when they have found the file, and then they type it out in a paper. It would take, on a good day, 5 to 7 days to get that process done. Now, just 2 weeks ago, I was going to meet a new client, and in the car on my way there, I asked my colleague, do a search on this company. And by the time we reached where we were going,
already got it.
For 630 shillings, paid using M-Pesa, information had come back.
Wow.
Now, I know there's still some issues around files missing and things like that. But the point is, and when you consider how Lands Registry has tried to do this for years and they still haven't gotten it right, the BRS has done better.
You're right.
So the digital transformation journey it has gone through is critical and important. We must make sure that there's security and safeguards for the information that is given. But it is a critical, we can't do without it in today's world. Nobody's going to wait 7 days before you say, I can even talk to you. They'll move on to the next person.
They will move on. That's true.
Wow. So that's why I think the digital transformation journey is important. It's key. So we need to push for it. We need to ensure there's capacity for it. We need to ensure there are safeguards around it and ethical practices that go with it. But that journey we must take.
Wow. Thanks for that. And we must be on alert. You're right. Every time. So, there are certain things that we must do, especially when it comes to anticipating changes. And I don't know what you're seeing from your end, upcoming legislative changes that could, companies should be prepared for.
So we talked about some of them at the beginning. Yes, you remember. We talked about data protection.
That's true.
It's becoming such a huge issue. Right now, you could be taking my picture and I sue you tomorrow.
Because by the way, have you signed consent?
I didn't see. I've come in. I've sat here. Nobody has asked me for consent, but it's crazy. Schools have been fined for putting children's photos up. Companies are being fined for providing reference letters for an employee. There's just it's a scary time in terms of, because everybody has somebody else's data. And whilst we are trying to protect it, the people who are data processors or data handlers, the ones taking the information, it's going to be a tricky time until our law settles on data protection. What does it actually mean? How do you protect yourself? How do you protect the data you have, but how do you make it practical?
That's true.
Because it needs to be practical. That's a big space for people to look at. Artificial intelligence is important, and we've talked about digital transformation. Now we have a draft AI policy that has been issued by the relevant ministry. And that is critical for our businesses because we need to have technologically driven businesses. So companies and entities need to look out for that. There's one thing, though, I want Maina for us to mention, just briefly in terms of looking forward.
Yeah.
And it's because it's a subject that's dear to me, around environmental sustainability and corporate social responsibility.
Absolutely.
We've seen a huge push now, and I was hoping we'd finish this interview without talking about Trump. But it looks like it's not possible.
Yes.
And why is it important?
Yeah.
You know, when we talk about ESG and corporate governance, the G is the corporate governance. It's a governance in the, and it comes as a package because it's environmental sustainability, it's the responsibility to the society, and then it's governance internally. How do you make sure you work well? And there's one issue that I think companies will need to be careful and wary of. We had just gotten to a place, and we were in a function together where a public company was launching its ESG report. You remember?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that.
And companies have just started doing that, and it was such a good thing because people were putting budgets behind them, and demonstrating what it is that they are doing to make sure their businesses are sustainable. Now that was a requirement of the Capital Markets Authority and the NSC. Central Bank also has regulations that require
ESG compliance and all that.
Yes. Then we have this big, and I don't know whether he was saying dig baby dig, or whatever the slogan was, or we are going to make sure that we flood this earth with crude oil because we have the reserves and we are not going to stop back. There was also the Paris Conventions and withdrawing from that. And you can imagine, every time we've had COPs, they are what are called the Paris Conventions. What people call them is COP. That's so COP 28, COP 29, as we have it. And it's a confusing time for companies because, of course, being compliant and sustainable was coming at a cost. And it was affecting the bottom line.
Of course.
So you can appreciate if some people are like, oh, we don't have to do it.
So some of them are very happy that they're going to run away from it.
I mean, you saw what people did with their diversity budgets. Immediately it is announced and people are saying we've removed our diversity budgets. I want to say, as a professional, and as a person who would like to be able to contribute to thought leadership, that I think companies need to be careful to think through what it is that they want to do with their organizations and what purpose it is and the objectives for which they operate. We have come a long way from moving from just bottom line, what's your profit, and to know that your profit could be good this year, but would your business be here in 5 years? That's what sustainability is about. And I think as people see the geopolitical changes, as we see the regulation, so with that, the EU has also issued a directive on ESG due diligence, which is making it more stringent. Anybody who wants to import into the EU, or anybody who's operating in the EU and is exporting out, there are now requirements to ensure that you're doing ESG due diligence on the companies that you're operating in, your supply chain. So if you're exporting flowers, for example, and you're exporting it into the EU, they will come and check what your ESG compliance is and do a due diligence for it. So I understand about bottom line. I do understand. But I think it's time for leaders and corporate leaders, for that matter, to make a decision on what the company stands for. And to understand that the journey of sustainability had a lot to do with the bottom line, because it may affect your bottom line today, to put in the reporting, to put in the compliance, to put in the capacity building. But it's for the long-term sustainability of your business first. Absolutely. Of your business first.
You're right.
And then, of course, the duty of a corporate also has responsibilities to the society and the environment in which it operates. And whilst I put it as a second point, because I know what matters for directors and it's the bottom line, we need to be able to still push that narrative.
You're right. And you know what, Rosa? Somebody, actually not someone, it's a whole institutional research that was done, that companies that end up complying on ESG, sustainability and all that, they actually end up saving. The first instance may be, we're spending, but in the long run, as you have said, they end up saving money. But anyway, let's talk about, as we come to a close, of how CSs can help companies, and even just professionals in general, can help companies in these emerging legal challenges and changes that we see. What would be your comment on that?
So CSs play a very important role because they are the conscience of the organization in as far as ensuring that there's compliance, ensuring that the internal governance structures are working, and ensuring that the companies are doing the right thing in how they engage with third parties. So I think for CSs, I mean, they don't have a choice. They have to be up to date in terms of ensuring what is the legal landscape, how is it changing, and then using that to internally direct the company on what they should be wary about. So in terms of their risk management, understanding that these are the key issues that affect our company, we need to be speaking about these things. That's a role of the role of a CS. The second role of the CS is ensuring capacity building, especially for the directors. It's a role of the CS to be able to look at the board that they are the company secretary of, and understanding, once you see what your risk management is, understanding, are my directors ready to face the challenges that they are going to face? So after we've talked about here things like data protection, if they don't understand what it is, how will they know how to protect the company or the decisions they need to make? We've talked here about cybersecurity. If the boards haven't done the relevant training, all they can see is a cost, because your IT, they've said, you need firewalls, we need to put things in the cloud, we need to do... It's a cost. It's a cost. That's affecting the bottom line. The directors need to understand why. The reason they understand that is through cybersecurity training. So I remember, because we put a cyber training facility in our organization. It's the first in Africa. You should come and visit it. And the point we are making is we do cybersecurity as a service. But we understood, and from how we were engaging with clients and the back and forth on the fees, we understood, you know what the problem is? If they don't understand the risk, then they don't understand why they need to do the protection. That's why we put the training facility. That's why we put the trainings. And I was giving that as an example to say, then the company sector needs to understand, because they hear what the directors are talking about, to understand this is an issue that needs training for our board members, because they are not understanding, or there's not alignment in the room about what needs to be done. And then ensuring, number 3, then compliance. And compliance has to be monitored regularly. Things don't get themselves done. And when people are not asked a question, it slips. So ensuring that licensing is up to date, ensuring that whatever forms of regulation that you're supposed to comply with are done. The CS has that responsibility. Of course, there's usually a legal function. And that's why CS and legal go hand in hand a lot. So where there's a separate legal function, the CS is just to make sure that that's being brought to the board and it's understood. Where the CS has the legal function, then they need to ensure that compliance themselves. Ensuring there's a robust compliance mechanism. Because there's now so much. I mean, can you imagine a poor company wondering which new law has been issued by who, when, and where?
It's a lot.
Someone has to be responsible to ensure that they're following up. They are picking up what is relevant for the company, and then ensuring that there's follow through on a regular basis to monitor compliance.
That's actually a very good parting shot, Rosa. Thank you so much for your time.
It was a pleasure.
There you have it. That's Rosa Mutero, who has just said it as it is, that we have to be on alert. Things keep changing, but we have to also be prepared to change as well as they go. Thank you so much for your time. See you next week.